There is a silence that follows men. Not the silence of confidence, not the silence of certainty, but the silence of fear. A silence that presses itself into the bones, into the shoulders that pretend to carry everything, into the voice that pretends to know. The silence of men is not empty. It is heavy. It is filled with things unsaid, things avoided, things buried so deep that even their dreams cannot reach them. And yet, beneath the masks, beneath the posture, beneath the words of strength and control, there is one secret that no man wishes to face. A secret so simple, so tender, so fragile, that the very act of naming it feels like a collapse. Masculine men are afraid of this secret, that their strength is not strength at all, but a veil stretched thin over longing, over grief, over the desire to be held. Listen carefully. Every man knows this, though he will not say it. Every man feels it, though he will not admit it. It comes late at night, in the stillness of a room where the body lies but the soul cannot sleep. It comes in the aging of the hands, the tremor that was not there before, the mirror that returns a face lined not only by time, but by the weight of silence carried too long. It comes when he looks at his father, or at the absence of his father, and realizes that strength was only a costume, a ritual, a performance endlessly repeated, generation after generation. It comes when he loves, truly loves, and feels how fragile love is, how easily it slips away, how unprepared he is to hold it, to tend to it, without breaking it in his hands. The secret is not about weakness. It is not about failure. It is not even about fear. It is about dependence. The unbearable truth that no man, however strong, can escape his need for the other. The need for the touch of another soul. The listening of another heart. The recognition that one does not stand alone. This is the truth that terrifies him. That his independence was never real. That the fortress he built was not protection, but prison. Carl Jung once said that what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. And here, in this unspoken secret, fate unfolds. A man denies his need, so he builds walls. He denies his longing, so he hardens his face. He denies his grief, so he grows violent or silent. And all the while, the soul waits, silent, patient, enduring, until one day, in age, in solitude, in the moments of loss that break him, the secret reveals itself. Alan Watts spoke often of the illusion of separateness, that we are not isolated, not cut off, not truly alone. But men raised in the armor of masculinity, have been told the opposite, that to depend is to fail, that to need is to shame, that to be tender is to be destroyed. And so the tragedy unfolds. In order to appear strong, they bury the very root of strength, connection, vulnerability, the willingness to be broken open. Listen, this is not a condemnation of men. It is not a criticism of masculinity. It is a lament, a mourning for what has been lost in the name of strength, a mourning for the boy who once cried freely, who once reached for comfort without hesitation, before the world told him to stop. That boy never disappears. He hides. He waits. He lingers in the corners of a man's silence. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear him, still calling out. The secret is this, that the masculine mask is not protection, but loneliness. And that every man, no matter how stoic, no matter how proud, carries within him a desire so human, so unmasculine, that he cannot bear to admit it. The desire to be forgiven, to be seen, to be loved not for the mask, but for the trembling soul underneath. And so the story repeats itself, generation after generation, until one man, one single man, has the courage to fall silent, not in fear, but in surrender, to admit the secret, to breathe into it, to let it soften his face, his voice, his heart, and perhaps, just perhaps, this is where true strength begins, not in the denial of need, but in the tender, aching confession. I am not enough alone. I never was. I was never meant to be. There is a moment in a man's life when the body betrays him. The knees that once climbed mountains begin to ache. The hands that once held steady begin to tremble. The eyes, they do not see with the same sharpness, but with a strange, blurred tenderness. And in that moment, the silence grows louder. The silence of all the things he never said. All the apologies never spoken. All the griefs never mourned. A man in age carries not only his years, but his unspoken words. They weigh more than the body, more than time itself. And yet, it is here, in the twilight of his strength, that the secret begins to stir. He begins to sense that what he denied was never gone. That dependence was always here. That the boy within him still waits to be held. But he does not speak it. Not yet. For to name it feels like undoing everything. A lifetime of control. A lifetime of stoicism. A lifetime of being the man. Carl Jung wrote that what remains unconscious is projected outward. And so the unspoken need becomes anger. The buried longing becomes judgment. The unwept tears become cold silence at the dinner table. What men cannot face in themselves, they condemn in others. They see weakness and call it shame. They see tenderness and call it foolishness. They see dependence and call it weakness. But they are only seeing their own reflection, the disowned part of their own soul. It is not easy to forgive oneself for this. Not easy to look back and realize, I hurt others because I could not admit my own hurt. I withheld love because I could not accept my own need. I closed myself because I feared being seen. Forgiveness comes slowly, like a tide. It does not rush in. It rises, retreats, rises again. It demands patience, surrender, humility. And perhaps this is why so few men reach it. Not because they are incapable, but because they are afraid. Afraid that to forgive themselves is to admit they were never who they pretended to be. Alan Watts often laughed gently at the seriousness with which men carry themselves, the way they cling to their identities, their roles, their masks. But beneath his laughter was compassion. He knew all these performances are simply ways of avoiding the great truth, that the self is not solid, that the soul is fluid, endlessly changing, endlessly breaking and reforming. And so the masculine man, who clings so tightly to his mask, is terrified of this, terrified of the dissolution, terrified that if the mask falls away, nothing will remain. But listen carefully. What remains is not nothing. What remains is everything. The whole field of being. The great silence. The vastness from which he was never separate. The secret he hides is not a shame. It is a doorway. A doorway into life itself. Still, most men will not walk through. They will circle the doorway, peer at it in silence, and turn away. Because to step through is to die to the image. to let the mask crumble, to let others see the trembling truth. And that truth is simple. I cannot do this alone. I was never meant to. There is such loneliness in the world of men. Not because women have abandoned them. Not because children do not love them. But because men have abandoned themselves. They have cut themselves off from the tender root, the soft ground of their own being. They wander. Successful perhaps. Respected perhaps. But haunted. Haunted by a silence that grows heavier with age. And yet, sometimes in the stillness, in the late hours when the mask loosens, a man will whisper into the dark, I am tired. I am afraid. I am sorry. These are not confessions of weakness. They are confessions of life. The secret he feared was a burden, turns out to be his liberation. Forgiveness does not erase the past. It does not undo the damage. It does not restore what was lost. But it does something quieter. It softens the edges. It allows the man to sit with himself, to hold his own trembling hands, to look at the boy within him and finally say, I see you. I never should have left you behind. I am here now. And in that moment, the secret ceases to be a threat. It becomes a bridge back to the soul, back to the silence that is not heavy but light, not empty but full. There is an emptiness that no victory can fill, no matter how high a man climbs, no matter how strong he appears. There is a silence waiting at the summit. It greets him like an old companion. It whispers, not in words, but in stillness. All of this was never enough. And here, in the quiet, he realizes the strange paradox of strength. The more he fought to prove his independence, the more dependent he became. On the approval of others, on the masks he wore, on the fragile idea of himself as invulnerable. Strength, he thought, was the absence of need. But strength was always the courage to admit need. Strength was always the tenderness he refused to touch. He remembers the years of silence, the times he sat across from those who loved him, unable to speak, unable to say the simplest words. I need you. I am afraid. I love you. The words were in his chest, but they never crossed his lips. They dissolved into the air, leaving only a heaviness that lingered long after. This is the secret. This is the weight masculine men carry. That beneath the armor is a wound, and beneath the wound is a longing, and beneath the longing is love. But love unspoken withers, respect withheld corrodes, and silence becomes a prison. The older he grows, the more he feels it. The way the body aches not only from time, but from the uncarried grief, the unwept sorrow, the unsaid words. Every unspoken truth carves itself into the muscles, into the bones, into the heart. It is no wonder so many men age not only in body, but in spirit. Yet forgiveness waits, not as a loud revelation, not as a sudden light, but as a quiet acceptance. Forgiveness whispers, you were afraid. You did not know how. And that is enough. It does not erase the silence, but it softens it. It allows a man to sit with himself without judgment, to look at his past not with shame, but with compassion. Jung wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And so the masculine man, when he finally turns toward his secret, is not destroyed by it. He is enlarged by it. For in admitting his dependence, he discovers a deeper independence. In confessing his fear, he discovers courage. In facing his loneliness, he discovers connection. It is never too late for this. Not at 50, not at 70, not at the final breath. The soul does not measure time as the body does. The soul only waits for the moment of turning. The moment a man is willing to be seen as he truly is. No mask, no armor, no performance. Alan Watts once said, "We do not come into this world, we come out of it." As leaves from a tree, a man is not separate from the world, not separate from love, not separate from the silence that bore him. But his fear of the secret makes him forget this. He believes he must hold himself apart. He believes he must endure alone. He believes he must never fall. And so he suffers. And so he hides. And so he ages not only in years, but in distance from himself. But when he admits, when he whispers into the quiet, "I am not enough alone," suddenly, he is no longer alone. The silence that once haunted him becomes a friend. The emptiness becomes space. The fear becomes tenderness. And in that moment, the secret ceases to be his burden. It becomes his liberation. There comes a time when all the striving is behind. When the battles, the victories, the humiliations, they no longer hold weight. A man sits quietly, perhaps at a window, perhaps in a chair worn thin by the years, and he notices something he once ignored. The sound of his own breathing. Slow, frail, perhaps, but alive. It is in this breathing that he finds the truth he ran from. Not in the applause, not in the respect of other men, not in the admiration of women, not in the trophies of conquest. The truth is here, in this simple rhythm, in this fragile continuity of life. The breath that was always with him. Even when he believed himself utterly alone, he realizes then, the secret he feared to admit was never his enemy. It was his guide. It was the silence calling him back. Again and again. Through the noise, through the loneliness, through the masks he wore. The secret was this: that to be masculine is not to conquer, but to surrender. Not to dominate, but to dissolve. Not to hold apart, but to return. The older he becomes, the more tenderly he looks upon his own mistakes. The failures that once burned with shame now appear almost innocent. The silences that once ached with loneliness now hum with a quiet music. The betrayals, the regrets, the words left unsaid, all softened, all absorbed into the vastness of time. He sees that there was never anything to forgive, only a misunderstanding, only a frightened heart, trying to protect itself from its own depth. Forgiveness comes not as a grand gesture, but as a sigh, a soft exhale that says, "It is enough. You are enough." And suddenly, everything he held back, the tears, the longing, the tenderness, it no longer feels dangerous. It feels like homecoming. Jung once said, "In each of us there is another, whom we do not know." Perhaps this is the true work of life. Not the pursuit of power, not the performance of strength, but the turning toward this hidden other. The man inside the man, the child inside the warrior, the soul inside the body. To embrace him, to let him speak, to let him breathe. And when he does, love returns. Not the fiery, desperate love of youth, but a quiet, enduring love. The kind that does not ask to be proven. The kind that is content simply to be. It does not need to be chased. It does not need to be earned. It was always here. waiting beneath the silence. Alan Watts spoke often of the ocean, and how we are not drops separate from it, but waves rising and falling within it. A masculine man, in his last solitude, comes to know this. He sees that the secret he feared, the secret he guarded with armor and silence, was only this: that he was never separate, that the strength he sought was already within the whole, that the love he withheld was the love he always was. And so, as he breathes his last, whether tonight or many years from now, he does not leave in despair. He leaves as one who has finally come home, not broken, not incomplete, but whole. The silence welcomes him, the secret dissolves, and in that vast stillness, he is free. Courageous men are afraid to admit this secret.